Welcome to Careers in Discovery, where you'll meet scientists who've forged outstanding careers in biotech and hear about what they've learned along the way. This podcast is brought to you by Singular, building brilliant biotechs. Andy Whiting is the CEO of Nevrargenics, a biotech company spun out of his research at the University of Durham using dual-acting retinoic acid receptor modulators as a novel treatment for neurodegenerative diseases. Andy talked to us about his decision to leave academia to run the company, how he knew when the research had the potential to become a real drug, and why uncertainty and risks shouldn't hold back your career. This week on Careers in Discovery, I'm really pleased to be joined by Andy Whiting of Nevrargenics. Andy, welcome to the show.
Thank you very much, Tom.
Great to see you. So, Andy, I'm really intrigued by the work you're doing at Nevrargenics and about these novel treatments that you're developing for neurodegenerative diseases, I should say. Got caught between neurodegenerative and neurodegeneration then.
It always gets stuck in my tongue as well. It's amazing how many times I can't say it properly. Yeah, don't worry.
Good. So tell us a bit more. Tell us about the approach you're taking. Tell us about the company. Tell us about where you're at with it all.
Yeah, we're at preclinical stage where we have a lead compound which is showing some really interesting effects in neurodegeneration. We haven't finalized on what sort of disease specifically that we might go into, but we do have designs around clinical trials, and we might hope to get into those in a year, 18 months or so from now. So it's a drug that we developed in academia in my labs. We found collaborative people at different institutions to work with, particularly Aberdeen University. Had a bit of money from BBSLC, follow-on fund money that helped catalyze intermediate stages that allowed us to see that the kinds of compounds we were making and pick out a particularly good compound were worth taking forwards.
Yeah.
Classic university spin-out model, and been continuing to then raise a bit of early stage cash to do some efficacy studies in models, and like all small sort of biotech companies, we raise money seemingly all the time. So it's that sort of, we're at that stage where we need a bit bigger chunk of cash, basically, to do a much more advanced model in something that's closer to a human, and then talking to the regulatory authorities, and then into humans. So the company's now taken over from the academic side of things,
right,
both in terms of the kinds of people we collaborate with. So it's more expert consultants in the regulatory areas, business development expertise, all of that kind of stuff that we're bringing into the company. So where Nevrargenics is literally evolving from being a shell to a reality with sort of salaried, not very many, but early stage key salaried positions, which are all about much more about raising money on the development side of the company. And we're still very much liaising, actually increasingly really, with more R&D academics who are providing additional sort of wider support and understanding, mechanistic understanding around the drug, which will help us hopefully promote the whole kind of arena around what we do as a company, help us reach out to investors, potential pharma partners, all of those things. So there's a whole raft of things that open up. So when you get out of the R&D laboratory program, the more academic side, all of those other things that you need to work as an active entity is where we are. So Nevrargenics does exist. We've been operating for a while. We've been paying, we've been claiming VAT back on we've been paying for, so we're actually acting as an organization, a salaried independent organization, and I've still got a foot in both an academic camp, albeit 20% of the time, so a day a week. That goes to zero shortly. I've done my last set of lectures in the academic, which I miss hugely because I love lecturing, and students love it, but I do. I've done what will hopefully be almost my last marking, because I won't miss that. And moving much more, albeit probably, you know, more than 6 days a week are involved with Nevrargenics.
Of course, yeah.
As with any small company. So I'm moving much more into that, and we've got our own premises, albeit somewhat dusty, bare concrete floor premises, but soon we'll have nice labs and offices and things like that. So it's literally that transition. It's in a way maybe the most exciting thing, because, you know, we're trying to do something phenomenally risky. We know that, you know, it's almost more, well, it's more risky than probably opening a restaurant. I mean, notoriously, that's one of the most, business-wise, it's one of the most risky things you can do, isn't it? Open a restaurant.
Yes, yeah.
Especially maybe post-COVID. And we're sort of literally in that sort of transitional phase between spin out and independent, you know, fully operating own premises with a lead compound. We know what it does, we know what it targets, we know how it works mostly, and we know it's still phenomenally looking phenomenally effective. And so we need to then just go through all the rest of the steps to the point at which we will get into the clinic, a sort of a level of study which will allow us to understand if we can bring big pharma on board, that they'll go, okay, we like this, we will partner with you. You need a big pharma then to translate that into market potential and take it out into the world as a whole. So everything from is everything between here and that stage, you know. That,
yes.
And then in the future, we would hope to have other drugs coming on stream, which will be targeted at other diseases using a similar idea, but perhaps tunable for different diseases. So we see our approach as a platform.
Right.
So that's where the company is really. We have the IP, we have all the official the sort of official existence in place, all the licensing and everything, and it's just a case of getting on with it. It is an interesting place to be.
Absolutely. And I think you're right. I think this is the most exciting point in a company's development, right? You will have exciting milestones and you will have other things that happen, of course, but at this point, anything could happen, right? And you haven't accumulated the baggage that comes with a company evolving necessarily, but there's still all that potential there. And I think it's, if it was economically feasible to live in this next 6 months over and over again, I think a lot of people would probably opt to do that. But, you know, that's how you make progress, right? Is moving beyond that. But and I think, you know, it'd be interesting, I suppose. It was a big step for you taking the full-time step to transitioning into that CEO role, because it requires a huge amount of focus, right? And I imagine, as much as you love lecturing and as much as you love the academic work you've been doing, it does take your focus away from the business at times, I guess. And so that must be a relief to be moving into that full-time.
Yes, and it's a different skill set. I think maybe, you know, it's not maybe necessarily something for everyone. I can see how some people would be. I know academics who are repelled by the idea of becoming industrialists. I mean, a long time ago, and maybe we'll talk about this later, but I worked in industry anyway, so I'm not unfamiliar.
Yes.
And so I've never been afraid of hopping over the fence, as it were. But it is a completely different thing. And I'm an organic chemist, and I've never run companies before, although I've been involved in a couple of spin-outs. And actually, over the 40 years or so as an academic, all of the projects, I think pretty much, that we've been involved in have had industrial input or liaison or case awards or collaborative in some way. And we've patented an awful lot of stuff and worked with industry throughout. So I've always been very close to being in industry while not being in industry, if you see what I mean.
Yeah.
That sort of and obviously in academia you do have that freedom to yes, if you do all your research and you do your lab demonstrating and you do all your lectures, but you can do all of that applied work and working directly with solving problems with industry and things. So it's a good place to be. So it isn't a difficult shift. However, I've never been a CEO of a company, and
right.
If we're successful, I won't continue into the long distant future, because of course there are the much more experienced pharma CEO people who've had 30, 20 whatever business development years, expertise. They've done they've delivered drugs to market numerous times, and we would probably need somebody like that at some stage. So I'm a caretaker, perhaps. I care, obviously passionate about what we do, and because I suppose I'm the inventor, I kind of have to be the one that carries it through this stage, because
Absolutely.
there is nobody else going to do that. And I think if
Yeah.
you not only have faith in that you have something interesting, but I think you have to have the commitment to take it through and transition through this stage, at which you can then pass it on to a much more dedicated, more expert, more expensive team for the next stages. And that's fine. That's exactly how it should work. So I'm doing this now, partly out of need, partly out of commitment, partly out of the area is a huge need. So there are other reasons, and both personal and historical and all sorts of things, which help with the drive for that. So I think all of those things have to come together. I think you have to care about what you do anyway.
Yes.
To do a good job in any job. And this is one that I really care about a lot, and I love doing as well. So it's a part of me as well, I think. But I'm hopefully self-effacing enough not to hang on to it beyond the point at which, if the board turned round to me and said, you know what, you're not doing the best job, time to move on, Andy, I'll be go, okay, that's fine. Let it go to somebody who knows what they're doing. That's
and I think that's a really healthy way to go into it, right? Because that will almost inevitably happen at some point, and it's very, very rare the occasion where a CEO can take a business from the point that it's at today to a listed business, or a business running phase 3 trials, or with drugs on the market, or that kind of thing. Those things are so different.
Yes.
That I think having that awareness of that is a really good place to start from. So well done for going with that in mind.
Well, we have had help. I mean, we brought a chairman on board who's doing a lot of the financial raising. That's been absolutely essential. That's been game changing to have somebody of that level of expertise. So looking at corporate governance, fronting up the investor relations, and also work very closely with someone who does all the business development kind of thing. So I've needed support from the very beginning.
Yes.
We've had a little bit through our tech transfer office, obviously through the university, but the universities are a little bit short necessarily of the depth of expertise that's really,
of course, yeah,
stage. So we have needed to very quickly go out to people who are very committed to early stage, not worried too much about necessarily remuneration before it's really possible. So yes, they're willing to take on that risk, and those are the people that are absolutely essential. So I'm simply, I kind of deliver the science package and help them to help me to put it in a format that we can, co-present, co-approach investors and companies and things about what we're doing, and change the messaging around who we're talking to, who's in the room at the time, and for what purpose. So we do have a team together already. It will obviously get more consolidated, and it will change with time. And that's a really interesting phase. And actually, key phase to success, having the right people. I think a lot of it, some of it's down to right time, right place, but especially right people in the room at the time. And if you don't have those, that's the point of failure, I think, early on.
No, absolutely. And neurodegeneration, of course, is an extremely complex challenge to solve. And it's good to see that there are more and more companies taking on that challenge, both in the UK and I think in the US as well. There's more and more companies coming through. Everyone has a slightly different approach to it, of course. I mean, what can you tell us about the Nevrargenics approach?
So our lead drug is a retinoic acid receptor modulator, we call it. I know it's a bit of a mouthful, but probably the best way of thinking about that, and hopefully, if you're like me, you like your broccoli and greens and healthy food and things. It's a really good source of carotenoids, and that's where you get a lot of your vitamin A from. And vitamin A is an interesting molecule because it's needed in all cells, in all mammals, and it's stored predominantly in liver, and it's shipped around in a kind of a protein coat, because it's such a greasy thing that it's not easily moved around without a protein carrier. That can get through the blood-brain barrier, gets into neuronal cells, into the brain and all of the cells, and it's metabolized into retinoic acid. And there are a number of isomers of retinoic acid. There are a number of other metabolites, hydroxylated, ketonated, all sorts of things. Most of them we actually don't know what they do, which is actually how we, as a scientist, actually how my research group got into this in the first place, mimic some of these and just see what small molecule mimics of these things did in biology. And
I see.
we were
Yeah.
a little surprised, I think, to say the weird things that we saw. But these molecules, these retinoic acid molecules, they act as both, especially genomically, but we now know non-genomically, they trigger receptors to control different biochemical processes.
Okay.
And they have been studied a lot, particularly in the 60s through maybe up to the mid-90s. People knew that these things are controlling thousands of biochemical reactions. And so they were looked at heavily by big pharma for oncology purposes. And there are a number of drugs on the market now based on synthetic retinoids in particular, as well as natural isomers. So all-trans retinoic acid being the common one, but both 9 and 13 cis are the other commercially produced and very key signaling molecules for different biochemical pathways. And they're used to treat things like neuroblastoma and breast cancer, psoriasis, a number of skin diseases and things. So these molecules have been looked at for a while, but big pharma tended to drop them really from probably the mid-90s. I think a lot of them were associated with side effects and things, and the controllability wasn't really, I think, fully understood. But we've been working in this area mainly because what's known with a lot of neurodegenerative disease is one of the key sets of signaling pathways which misfire our retinoic acid receptor pathway. So one's initiated by retinoic acid, and you can by upregulating by addition of it in models, for example, in vitro models, if you add exogenous retinoic acid, you can re-trigger the expression of retinoic acid receptor proteins, and that can have impacts on neuroinflammatory pathways and all sorts of other things, and proteostasis. So we knew these molecules are important. We weren't looking to make drugs. We were looking to understand biochemical pathways.
Yes.
But out of that came a drug development program in the end. I think we sort of, I suppose, developed a sufficient manual as to what to do, not do, structure, activity, control these things in terms of genomic, non-genomic models that reflect neuronal regeneration, repair, to think, okay, maybe we can make drugs. And if we can make things that penetrate the blood-brain barrier, which is not a prime property of retinoic acid analogues, which is why all-trans retinoic acid is produced in cells by catabolic enzymes or metabolic enzymes in situ, because it's a terrible drug. Nature's never managed to make retinoic acids into good drugs, so they don't move around around the body. They are produced in situ in cells, but are necessary for controlling so many biochemistries. So we wanted to make mimics that could pass the blood-brain barrier, could be druggable molecules. Initially, for a while, seemed like a bit of a tough test to take something inherently, sort of amphiphilic, very non-polar in large parts of it, and turn these things into druggable compounds. But that really was the thing that we took on. We made some terrible compounds that they don't do the things that we wanted, but we've made some phenomenally exciting ones that do the things we want to do and control the pathways that we want and don't interfere with the pathways we don't want. So that's what we've been. So these are retinoic acid receptor molecules that we can keep away from off-target tox effects and controllable on-target effects, and particularly focused around upregulation of proteostasis-related biochemical pathways. And of course, we know with neurodegeneration that proteostasis is a huge issue, and whether it's beta amyloid or tau or alpha-synuclein or all the TDP-43, we know that misfiring of proteostasis is one of the big problems in neurodegeneration.
Yeah, I see. Interesting. And so as you're kind of exploring the effects of these molecules, and you realize there's druggable properties there, or there's potential druggable properties there, and start to work on those, what was the point at which you thought, this has really got legs, we need to take this beyond the university and spin it out into its own entity to really focus on this? We
got some funding from PBSRC. It was a follow-up fund. So we had a lead compound that did. So we had a particular. So one of the very early drugs we designed to act purely as a mimic of all-trans retinoic acid itself. So it mimics the lowest energy conformation structure of all-trans retinoic acid, and it did what all-trans retinoic acid did in all cellular in vitro models that we looked at, but about 10 to 100 times more efficiently in terms of order of magnitude.
Right.
Because these molecules are not easily metabolized, because a lot of the catabolism that focuses on controlling relative concentrations of retinoic acids within cells, because they have so many effects. So there's a lot of cellular machinery.
Right. Yes.
You know, isomerases, oxidative enzymes, all of those sorts of things that control and either excrete or help to produce these compounds in situ. This, of course, the synthetic ones don't have a lot of the motifs, which meant they were much less susceptible to CYP oxidation and things like that. So they have a profoundly different effect, and they're much more long-lived within tissue. So you can start to see downstream effects from longer-term exposure of these without the cell kind of, changing the substrate into other things.
Right.
So we knew that we had profound effects. The question was, could we make them into decent drug molecules? And that was what the follow-on fund was about. Could we turn them into things that, for example, water soluble? So yes. Our early leads had similarly miserable solubility in water, less than 10 micromolar, for example, in water. And then we made some analogues that were over 100 micromolar soluble in water. And one of our leads is over 100 micromolar soluble in water. That seems a profound penetration effect. So a number of molecules we've made. So we started to look at CNS exposure, so injecting a set amount of a compound into a test animal, see where it distributes within the brain, within the CNS, and that allows you to assess how well it penetrates the blood-brain barrier,
right?
And also how it builds up in different tissues. And certainly we see for different compounds have different levels of buildup in different tissues. So you can almost get the idea, well, can you tune these molecules to have more or less penetration into the cerebellum or the the frontal cortex? And of course, if you want something that's more frontal cortex, it might be more FTD useful, for treating, frontotemporal dementia where the cortex is more damaged than the cerebellum. So that's one of the things maybe we have in mind for the future. So at that point, we thought, maybe we're dealing with compounds that could be drugs. Actually,
yeah, I see.
We could turn things that have inherently been terrible drugs, and the pharma industry had immense problems with in the past and have to use at very high levels of exposure, and so they hit on and off-target tox problems, into things that could be much more controllable, could be much lower levels. And the kind of efficacies that we've been looking at in some of our screening models, we were down at the sub-nanomolar level. So we were looking at level, 3 to 5 orders of magnitude lower levels of used in models than we would need with, for example, all-trans retinoic acid or our early lead synthetic molecules, or other commercial ones that are on the market,
right?
Which are not effective in the same kinds of models that we've been using anyway. So, so these compounds showed that phenomenal level of properties, but we're also showed. I think we've realised that, and I think other people are beginning to, thankfully as well. I think probably long overdue, that complex diseases need complex solutions, and the idea of single target, single drug, no side effect drugs, magic bullet type thing, don't exist. And actually, in a way, to embrace the idea of multimodal activity is a good thing. Yes, you need to iron out all of the effects in mechanisms you don't want operating, because they have a negative effect. But then you can hopefully control multi-mechanism drugs in a positive way. But of course, it's a lot more difficult. But you have to take the time to do that. So we know our compounds are at least dual acting. And probably there's another mode of action which we have yet to fully identify, but we know is operating for a number of reasons. But we've kind of embraced that and go, okay, well, if we control all of these pathways positively, we have a phenomenally useful drug. We just need to understand how it works, and for future generations to be able to build on that. So the realization of when we have a decent drug was that penetration, very, very, very low exposure levels needed, and compounds that were clearly showed positive effects in models that could be viewed as being regenerative. And obviously, neuronal regeneration is the holy grail.
Right.
Yes, pharma at the moment has compounds that slow disease at best. What you want is, though, to reverse them. I mean, isn't that? I mean, we think with oncology. You go back 50 years, when we were looking really heavily at oncology and huge amounts of investment coming in. Now we think of most cancer is treatable.
Right.
And a lot of it is reversal. Yes, okay, you chop bits out and all sorts of things as well. But the therapy's changed profoundly, and if you catch it early, so yes, early diagnosis, the earlier the better. But the treatments are getting phenomenally better.
Mm-hmm.
And if you put in that level of investment and you can reverse some of these things, you can treat them, then surely it's about investment, understanding time, research, etc. Surely that's doable with neurodegeneration, that you can not just slow, not just stop, but reverse and repair. And we think that's where the academia and industry should be aiming.
Yeah.
Because without that, we don't, that huge unmet need of 1 billion sufferers of neurodegeneration on the planet today, they have no real hope. And I think we need to do something about that.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think the need clearly justifies the complexity, right? And the challenge that it creates. I think something we talked about just before we started recording, actually, Andy, just picking up on what you're talking about. So I imagine there are lots of programs in academic institutions around the country and around the world who show promise in a similar way to yours did, to the way that yours did, that never really go anywhere. And I know you've sort of come to a realization, or you have an opinion about why this sometimes is. It'd be interesting to talk about that as well.
No, absolutely. And in fact, I think I've mentioned this in the last couple of talks I've done about where we are as this sort of transitional company between having gone from R&D in the lab in a research environment, more research-based environment, to a more sort of industrial application side. Yeah, it's a really interesting point. I think many academics get to the stage of going, okay, we've got something really interesting here. We've been doing this research in this area for many years. And the people who are doing that kind of work tend to, I think, bifurcate naturally into two types. Those who are always going to stay academics and researchers, right, and are almost afraid of what the next steps are. And I think they trust universities to be able to take IP or results or something else and bring other people into the conversation, to develop a spin-out company, a development pathway, a licensing program. And I think I've met many academics who say, oh, well, we've got some really interesting IP and we're offering the licensing opportunity around. And that's always makes me laugh, because I'm not sure who's actually doing this. But
right.
I've never met anyone who really. Universities do sort of, they do have showcase some of the things that are happening. It's true. Very, very few examples where this is really kind of taken up, and universities, tech transfer organizations, as much as they try, have really the right network, because they're working across vast numbers of different research areas, subject areas and things. And they to find the that needle in the haystack appropriate match expert who's going, okay, that's the data I was looking for. I really would like to take further, and I've got contacts. I know almost no examples. The people who are translating this are people like myself, who are not afraid of, for whatever reason, maybe the stage they are in their own careers. Are they comfortably at the point where they're not as worried about their pension anymore? Because because these are really key indicators, especially if somebody's going to say to you, well, how much skin have you got in the game? And you sort of say, well, I've got I've got lots of dependents. I'm early stage. I've got a huge mortgage, and I really can't risk it. That is a perfectly understandable and acceptable thing to realise. In which case, you need to be able to find early stage to allow. If you're really committed to spinning something out, obviously risk is a huge factor, and you have to be cognitive of the potential for things to go wrong, because early stage high-tech companies, small molecule neurodegeneration, you might argue, is a tricky combination, of course. So I think you've got to want to jump over the fence and sort of go, okay, I'm going to take it forward to a stage upon which, if we're successful, the right kind of development team, company team, commercialization team will naturally take over and take it forward, because they will only do that from a certain point of achievement, where early stage goals have been made. It's clear that something's going to get into the market, it's going to start making money, and they won't come on board until often that risk is mitigated sufficiently. So I think you've got to know that you can bridge this period, and it can be either long or short depending upon where you are in the world, how much money you've got. It's a very different development scene, for example, in the US compared to here. Raising early stage capital is much more difficult here than it is in the US. They tend to raise an awful lot more, but their expectations are high. So all sorts of factors like that come into play. And I think, who's around at the time that these decisions need to be made about who, how, timescale, is a really interesting one. And there is no magic formulation, but the one thing that's clear is that the person who's probably done most of the, generated most of the ideas, is probably the person who's orchestrating team of people who are working together. Is probably going to have to be that person who goes, okay, you know what? The only way it's going to go forward from now on is if I front it. Yes, with support of appropriate people. Yes, you have to find those. Yes, those are game changing. They have to be the right ones, as I mentioned. But without that person, without the care, the drive, the knowledge, I don't think it can get anywhere. And that's actually not an easy conversation to have with people, to say to people. And when I've been giving lectures, in fact, one up in Newcastle not so long ago, so say to people, well, you guys are making, designing drugs and different applications, different reasons, some in neurodegeneration, yes. So what will you do when you hit that really interesting compound? Do you know what you're going to do? How you're going to do it? Do you think somebody else will take it over? Because these are the things you need to think about. Because if you've got some really interesting compounds, actually the rest of us in the rest of the world with that need, waiting for drugs to appear, need you to go, enough people to go, I'm committed enough. I want to take this forwards. But the consequences are major. They certainly are major.
No, absolutely. And I suppose there's several things that come as a side effect of that, almost, in that you will almost certainly be the person who knows the most about the potential of this program, right? If you've been the one who's developed, several years worth of knowledge around it at that point. And I guess from everybody else that's potentially going to get involved, if you are willing to put your skin in the game, as you say, and put yourself on the line, put your career on the line to push this forward, then that is a good sign. And similarly, rightly or wrongly, even if it's for personal reasons and you're not willing to do that, people will also take that as an indication of your belief in the program. And it requires someone who really believes in it, right? Because there's so many reasons that it won't work, but you have to have absolute conviction that it will, or it could, at least. It could.
That's really, and I think you're absolutely right. And of course, one of the reasons many companies fail actually is not, well, there are probably two reasons, but in fact, the one that's, I think, least often, from what I've seen, what I've encountered, is the research and the results and the quality of the information and the data. Think, okay, there might not be quite enough. We might need some more studies, but that needs cash and grants and things. But actually, I think it's down to two things. It's the right time, the right people in the right room, and that naturally comes together.
Yes.
And you're right. It's that level of commitment that somebody can go on what might be a wild goose chase or a wild ride where we've got, I find it exciting, but I'm lucky enough that I'm at a stage in my career where I'm not so worried. And I think there is a slightly unreasonable, and I know why investors say this, that, I want to see that you've got skin in the game, and I get that. But, if you're a 35-year-old and you've got, two young kids and a mortgage, and I got my first mortgage during the Thatcher years, when my mortgage went from sort of 7.5% to 15% overnight. Right. And that was a difficult time, I tell you.
Yes.
So if somebody said to me, well, Are you going to do something phenomenally risky and jump ship and do this? I would have thought maybe very differently about the way I do it. So I think there is a level of unfairness. It's a very different thing saying, well, I'm not sure that you've got commitment if you can't do A, B, or C, because that is so personal to you as to whether you really can commit and at what level. Yes, there's a big chunk of that which is inherently about one's character, but it is a really difficult decision. And I think, and of course, I would err on the side of supporting academia. I lived through that, some financially difficult times in my life. So, but I think, I make the point to people, well, you can judge commitment by someone's actions as well. And you can go so far. Universities, I think, could help bridge the gap better. So I have I can't remember what it is now, but a certain percentage that when I first started to spin out companies, I think it was about 12%, some random number of my time I could use to help, while still being fully salaried by the university, to help develop spin out companies. Well, 12% doesn't go very far.
Yes.
And the university is slightly cheeky because 12% of what, 60 hours that I do, but get paid for 35. The universities have always had the ability, I think, to be a little disingenuous about the way in which they allow academics to work on projects while benefiting from the fact that they're already probably research scientists don't do things based on a 35-hour week. That's for sure.
Right. Yes.
That you would never do anything as a research active academic. And most academic families would know that, oh, yes, you're going on holiday this year. Oh, it just happens to be a city where there's a conference. So I've continually had a hard time from my wife saying, oh, we're in Boston this year because which conference are we going to?
Yes, yeah.
That level of commitment is there. And universities, I think, do exploit this. And somewhere there has to be a balance. And I think, inside academia, people understand the need to translate the fact that studies, of course, depend on translation as well as research and all of the other things that we do, and environment and things. I don't think people outside understand actually that multifaceted complexity that academics have to have. And then if you add another huge strand,
yes,
and a little bit of translation sounds like, oh, I've got a patent, we're going to exploit it. Well, what does that mean? Well, that means another 3, 4, 5 days a week. It could be, and as you get further through that program, it's more and more days, and the more days that you've got, that you need to go into that program in order to have a greater chance of success. So
yes,
the commitment is huge, and investors don't always get that. I don't think universities really quite get that, and they're certainly not very good at putting in financial support. Yes, they'll pay for writing the odd patent and things like that, but at some stage they'll usually want it back, and they take shareholding. So they're very good at taking multiple slices of cake,
right? Yes.
Always giving back, I think, in due form. I think that could change. It could certainly be better. The level of understanding about how the translation process works. There's a gap. There's a clear gap, I think, there. And I think people like myself are willing to take the chance, and also to, as we're doing now, discuss it with people and try and get people to understand what this is like and where the gaps are. And of course, government seem to understand not very much most of the time. And we when they do come around to understanding something, it's usually a bit late. It's usually targeted in a way in which the horse is largely bolted very often. But you have to work around all these things because you know what you need to do at any particular time, and it's whatever the job needs. It's whatever it takes, and not everybody is able to do that. And I think that's understandable. So those are that very complex discussion, because every single situation will be different. There is no one size.
No, of course,
and there never will be. And what works for one person or at one time in one stage of one development program won't ever be reproduced anywhere else.
Yeah.
And luck and timing, I think, play a huge part in this. And that is certainly a story, I think, that needs to be got out there more, because I don't think that necessarily is a reason to be afraid of things. I think if you're naturally the kind of person who's adventurous, and your families are willing to be adventurous with you and understanding, it is a wonderful thing to do. But you have to understand the risks, and also understand that, well, for a well-educated person, even if things went wrong, you're always going to be able to pick up something else and do something else, and that would be obviously a worst case scenario. But I think we live in a world where we expect change, and you can embrace change and risk, and that's the way I think I've looked at it. And even earlier in my career, when I wasn't more financially stable, probably as I am now, because I'm later in my career, very much later in my career, I was willing to take a level of risk. So I've always done that, knowing full well, what's the worst that can happen? Well, I'll get a job somewhere else, right? I think we're lucky in that way because we're educated. CV, publications. It may not be what you want, and you may not achieve what you're really after, but you'll pay the bills and somehow keep the mortgage going. And all of those things.
And I think people underestimate that. The survival mechanism in your brain is very effective at avoiding risk, right? And I think when people ask what's the worst that can happen, I think what they often tell themselves is, well, I'll never get a job again, and my family will starve, and we'll lose our house, and we'll be living on the street, and and it's an end of world scenario, isn't it? And I think of course, conceivably that could happen, but as you say, it's unlikely for someone who has the level of training that most of the people who would find themselves in that situation have. I think crafting a narrative around it's important, right? So to be able to communicate to people, well, look, I tried this and it didn't work, and these are the reasons, and this is what I learned from it. I think that's important. But yeah, usually the worst case scenario is not as much of a worst case as people expect it might end up being.
No, and I think you're right, and you have to be realistic, because I mean, at the end of the day, most tech companies don't succeed in the longer term. And all of the people I've known who've been in those different kinds of businesses, they've gone on to do, some have gone on to do better things. They've come up with something better in the future, but because they've had that experience, and that might include me, because they've had that experience, they can kick on a bit better, quicker, faster, more informed, and be better at identifying opportunities. So I think you're right. And those others who completely jumped ship and done something completely different have been happy with their different career directions in education or whatever it is. Even though somebody who's sort of done more kind of counselling and that kind of thing. Something completely different, having been a scientist, and they love what they do. And
yes,
and that's okay. So I think you're right. People are naturally adaptive, but they're also, I think you're right, inherently risk averse and afraid of taking risk. And actually, I enjoy that. And the uncertainty I don't find upsetting. I actually find it exciting. Yes, I sort of think, okay, well, if everything goes wrong tomorrow, will I start cashing in my pension? Well, I think, well, if I need to, I will, because you do what you have to do. Or I would find another job somewhere else for a few years until something that similar. I would look around and see what's there at the time. And you can't pre-judge these things. You have to see what's there on the day, on the week, and go from there.
Yeah, and I think running a business, whether it's a biotech company or any type of business, really it's one of those things that you can only learn to do by doing it. And so the first time that you do it, you're going to screw a load of things up, and hopefully the company survives that. But if it doesn't, and or if the science doesn't work, or the program doesn't advance, so you can't raise the money, lots of things that could happen. You've hopefully learned from those things that you screwed up, and you don't make the same mistakes the next time around, right? And so I've talked to a lot of people about this as being one of the differences between the US kind of approach to entrepreneurship and ours, in that actually, sort of as a CEO, the failures are almost like a badge of experience. They're almost like the validation that you've been through it, as long as you can, again, demonstrate what you've learned from that. Whereas I think our perception is often that, well, if you fail, that's it. You're done. I think you've got to make it work the first time.
I think there's a little bit of that, but I think you've also got to develop a fairly thick hide as well. So I think mine's getting more rhinoceros-like by the day. And as an academic anyway, you're used to getting proposals kicked back from often sometimes bizarre reasons from referees who you think haven't even read the proposal. And I think the same is true when you're judged by somebody else who's not gone through it in your sort of business career as well. That if it were that simple, then there'd be an awful lot more of those businesses showing success and things. So I think it really isn't that simple. And yes, making mistakes is okay. And as human beings, I think that's the thing that we should embrace. And in fact, in most of the walks of life and as parents, we know that making mistakes is part of the growing and learning process. Yeah. And I fully agree with you. I think there is that level of understanding in the US. I think there's better stewardship and direction as well. There's a wider community that's more willing to engage, sometimes early stage, without wanting, skin in that game initially, see how something goes. That sort of benign tutoring, supportive tutoring, which there are people here, but they usually want something for it,
Right.
And you don't always necessarily, some of those people who tout that kind of business don't always seem to understand that they seem to be doing more for their own gain rather than actually being genuinely interested in helping you through a stage. And I've met a few people like that. So I think of course, in any team anyway, you've got to be very careful to work with people you can get on with. It's a bit like over the years, not always necessarily successful, but in my own research group, take on PhDs, I sort of say to interviewing them, well, you have to like me because you're going to have to put up with me for a long time. And I need to like you. We have to be able to work together. This is a relationship, and a very close one for quite a long time. And it's even more true, I think, in a newly developing spin-out company, because when it gets really tough, it does get tough, and you sort of figuratively have to kind of go to the cash machine now and again to help things, and because cash flow is always an issue early stage. And you have to be, you have to have understanding family and friends and everything else to be able to sometimes get through that. That is a necessity, and it's not simple. So yeah, you get to ride the raves a little bit, the ups and downs, the troughs, the highs. But that adds to the excitement, and I think you've got to embrace it that way.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think at least you have a hand on the tiller, right? At least you have some element of not necessarily control, but influence. Influence.
And keep a smile on the face, and hopefully know the direction you're going. Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah, exactly. Well, Andy, normally in these interviews we talk about your career story and your journey through it, but we've spent so long getting into this that we've run out of time. But I think there's a lot in there for people, and a lot of advice people can take from it. And I think there's been a really, really useful and productive discussion. So thank you for that.
Thank you.
Best of luck with Nevrargenics, and we'll certainly ours too, and we will be keeping an eye out for you. And yeah, thank you so much for joining us.
Cheers. Thanks a lot.
Thanks very much for listening. Careers in Discovery is sponsored by Singular, helping you to build a brilliant biotech company. Biotech leaders spend far too much time, money, and energy on hiring and people issues. Head to www.singular-biotech.com to learn how you can recruit and engage your team more effectively so you can focus on developing medicines, treating patients, and saving lives.